Evening, morning, afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. Hope you are having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussions with regular people just like yourselves. It is so great today to be joined by Matthew Leising, who has been a reporter since 2001 and for 17 years worked for Bloomberg News. He began covering crypto in 2015 as one of the first mainstream journalists to understand what the breakthrough of blockchain technology could mean for the future of finance, culture, and industry in general. Before we get into all of that, because that was a mouthful, let's talk about his background and how he got to where he is today. Matt, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Karen, for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I've been a reporter since 2001. I started out just covering general news in Oakland, California after I graduated from UC Berkeley through their graduate journalism school. Did that for a couple of years and then moved to New York City in 2004. Didn't have a job, didn't have an apartment, just one of those stories where I got to go to New York. I applied all over town for jobs, and it was still a hangover from the 2001 dot-com bubble was still affecting a lot of news organizations. There weren't many jobs, and Bloomberg was one of the only places hiring because, as your listeners might or might not know, Bloomberg doesn't work off of the normal subscription model for advertising revenue. There's this thing called the Bloomberg Terminal. It's this amazingly powerful desktop application that you have that will give you all sorts of information and analysis into any financial market in the world. And any financial market in the world, it's got everything. Got hired there, had never done business reporting at all. I didn't know a thing about it. Got thrown into the fire. Originally, I got hired into the energy team where my first job was reporting on oil tankers and like where oil tankers were moving from Saudi Arabia to Louisiana or what the rates they were paying and all this stuff. And the only interesting thing about it at that time was that oil was going to its all-time high of, I think it reached $148 a barrel right around 2005-ish or so, late 2004. That made it interesting. A lot of people cared about it. But I hated it. It was like super boring because you're talking to people like brokers that have customers on both sides. Think about the oil company on the one side and the refiner on the other. And so they don't want to piss off anybody. So they'll never tell you anything interesting. So it was just a really tough beat as a reporter. At the same time, I also was told to start covering the New York Mercantile Exchange, which was where oil futures were traded in the United States. And that was something that I'd never heard of. Like I didn't know what a derivative was to save my life. But I soon became fascinated with it. It was really interesting. It's where wholesale prices for commodities are set. So in this case, it was oil, natural gas, gold, silver. And so really got interested in derivatives, moved on from there to cover the exchanges in Chicago, which are much bigger. It's like the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, the Chicago Board of Trade at that time, where all the agricultural commodities are traded and also the financial products like interest rates and treasuries. Long story short, all of that sort of brought me into this part of the market where it's like, what is the market structure of like, how did these markets work and how does the treasury market work? How does the bond market work? How does the derivatives market work? So I got really deep in the weeds there, and that's something you can do at Bloomberg, which is cool. You can really carve out a beat and be very in a niche. And then this financial crisis happened, went through all of that, had a front row seat, which was at different times terrifying and at other times exhilarating. Then came out from that and covered very closely how the Dodd-Frank Act was implemented in the United States to try to like make changes to how the system works so that we wouldn't have another financial crisis. So all of that is like background to like, let's go to 2015 when I finally wrapped my head around what Bitcoin was about. And it wasn't about the actual Bitcoin. It was about the blockchain technology that was underlying it all. Because by then I felt like I had a really good understanding of how markets worked and how banks and their customers like hedge funds and asset managers all interact on a daily basis, trading money, just like trading and doing all sorts of things. And when I finally figured out that the blockchain was this new sort of way of creating a market or creating a network where it was decentralized and it was peer-to-peer and it was global, that kind of made the light bulb go off over my head. And I realized that, oh my gosh, if Wall Street in general and other industries could adopt this sort of this new way of creating a network amongst all the people that are trading in a certain asset class or just in any sort of, or this isn't what I was thinking at the time, but it's come to be that like, if you're an artist or you're a musician, there's all these things that like this new way of organizing a network could be implied or imposed, I realized it was a huge deal. And so I said, okay, I want to start covering blockchain as part of my beat as a market structure reporter. And at that point in 2015, my editors at Bloomberg News were like, "What the heck is a blockchain?" So it was a little early. I never claimed to be the first or anything like that, but it was early, and it just grew from there. When because at that point, Wall Street was absolutely experimenting with this stuff and already starting to talk about it. And I knew people and high up places at banks like J.P. Morgan and Morgan Stanley that were starting to think, hey, this could be a huge evolution for us in how we go about our business. So that's the reason I'm on this podcast, is like that was the starting moment from then at 2015. And now 7 years later, it feels like 100 years later, and we've been through so many things that I'm sure we'll get into that.
For sure. Matt, you raised two really interesting points. And one of the things I wanted to ask is, you've been in the space, or at least understanding the space much earlier than me. And I've seen like an interesting shift in the media in terms of coverage on blockchain and cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and Ethereum and whatever popular terminology you want to use. I mean, from when you started to now, like, how would you describe the way the cryptocurrency blockchain narrative has changed?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it has come in waves for sure. So from 2015 until early 2017, nobody cared. Like what I was doing, nobody cared about it. Like it was hard to get attention. But I found it fascinating because I really like technology and I really like understanding how things work. And I thought that, especially when I understood how Ethereum worked, I was just hooked. And so I was very into it, but couldn't get many people interested. Then you might remember early 2017, late 2016, early 2017, the ICO boom started, the initial coin offering boom, right? Where you could now, if you're a startup, you could say, hey, I'm going to build a competitor to Uber. I'm going to call it CarCoin. And I want you to buy my CarCoin so that I can then get that money and develop my project. And then eventually in a year or two, I will compete with Uber, but in a decentralized fashion where it's peer-to-peer and there's no centralized entity like Uber taking 30% of all the money that's made. So, right. Of course, that's fantastic on paper. Theoretically, it's brilliant, but there were a million scams and a lot of it was just nonsense, right? There was just plagiarism and everybody just ripped off everybody else and everybody wanted to get rich quick. What happened though was that demand and that fervor like pushed up Ethereum to a record price. It also, I think, helped Bitcoin go to a record price. So by the time that we are in Thanksgiving in the United States around 2017, I remember being at random bars and just overhearing people talking about crypto, and I could not believe it. Like because I was on this for a couple of years before that, and I'm like, oh my god! All of a sudden, it's broken through, and moms and dads and uncles and are just like, hey, you know about this crypto thing? What they're asking me what they should do. That was really fascinating, and that made like Bloomberg News, from my perspective, from my experience personally, I could not get a lot of attention to what I was doing before that. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, we need to start covering this. This is huge. Bitcoin's now $20,000, which was from zero to $20,000 in a number of years, was a story that Bloomberg could not ignore any longer. That was the first wave. And then there was the crash, right? Everything went down after that. 2018 was the first real bad crypto winter. Everybody went away and a lot of skeptics started coming out and saying, oh, we always knew this was a scam. And there was a couple of years there where it was tough, and I kept covering the beat and still thought that it was a fascinating technology and I could really see the potential of it all, and I still do. So and then we come around to 2020, when now all of a sudden there's a whole new wave of protocols that come out that allow for decentralized finance, which everyone calls DeFi. So now people had been building during the winter and like when everything was down, and now they came out with all these protocols where you could now stake coins, or you could lend your coins to get cash back, or you could do things to earn interest on your crypto. And that was called DeFi Summer, and it really brought back into the fold. And here was a brand new aspect of what crypto was doing. So in the first place, like the initial coin offering boom, lots of scams also, but it also on the positive side was a new way for startups to raise money without going through a venture capital fund or a bank or anyone else. It was going directly to your potential users and raising money through them. So that's huge, because that's a huge part of what finance is there for, is to raise money. It's for capital creation. So now you could do it in a decentralized way. Now in DeFi summer in 2020, you had collateralized lending that you could use with DeFi. You had ways of earning interest on the coins you owned. And so that's another huge part of finance, where it's, okay, how do I use what I have to make more money? Like, how do I want to make money from what I have? And collateralized lending in the traditional financial world is a huge part of that. And now it was being remade in this sort of like peer-to-peer fashion. So I was just watching this happen, and I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. All these pillars of the traditional financial world are being remade in this peer-to-peer fashion. So that all happened. Like next year, you got the NFT craze in 2021. Everyone went nuts, and we saw people selling an NFT for $69 million. You got the Bored Ape Yacht Club, you've got CryptoPunks, and people are just going bananas, and there's a crazy money being spent. And then, of course, fast forward to today, we're in another winter and everything's crashed, and there's been huge scams and like fraud, like outright fraud. And so through that process, what I got disillusioned with was everyone went away after the winter, after the ICO boom. They all just left and said, oh, it's a scam. And then DeFi summer comes in and everybody comes back in and wants to like just start where they left off a couple of years ago. And I'm like, hey man, I've been here the whole time. And like, you can't just leave this thing when it crashes and then come back when, you know, when it's hot again. And to answer your question in a very long way, I'm sorry about that, is like the media is got such a short attention span that they only care about stuff when it's really hot or when it's really cold. And so I got disillusioned with that sort of accordion up and down thing. And that's one thing that made me want to start my own media company, Decential, was just to try to not be like super crazy about it when it's a bull market and super down on it when it's a bear market. And I think that's my main complaint about the mainstream press coverage of this space, is that people haven't taken the time, reporters and editors at major publications like the Financial Times, the New York Times, lots of others, even Bloomberg. There are good reporters at all of those places that cover the space, but in general, I feel they have not educated themselves sufficiently to understand that these booms and busts will happen, but it doesn't mean that the technology is going away. We had the dot-com crash in the late 90s. Doesn't mean the internet went away. It was just like there are times when there's exuberance and it needs to get washed out of the market. And that's what's happening in crypto. It's just, I think, on a quicker timeline right now. And so I hope I answered your question without putting everyone to sleep.
Oh, no, it's great to put everything in perspective. And you gave me an awesome segue into Decential as well. The space, crypto changed, blockchain changed a lot in 2022. Like you said, a huge amount of skepticism because of, and somewhat rightly given what happened in 2022, FTX, Luna, 3AC. Speaking from starting your own news organization as well, like I guess this is going to be a bit of a complex question. Like a typical newsroom runs like quite differently, right? But you're starting Decential and like in 2023 covering the space, like after everything that's happened, like what are you hoping to use Decential to do this year?
The founding ethos of Decential was that my partner, Neil Berkeley, who's a filmmaker, and myself, who's a writer and reporter, we didn't feel that the people in the space were being covered well enough, like the characters and the folks who are building and who are making all of these crazy things that we're talking about. We didn't feel that their stories were being told. The technology was always put forward first. The price of coins was put first. NFT prices or whatever was put first. And we wanted to really make an effort to tell the stories about the people behind the scenes that were doing all these things, because obviously all of this comes from people. And if you know anything about crypto and have been in the community at all, that everyone you meet is weird and they're fun and they're smart and they're usually maybe a little bit off, but they're good people. And they're like, in the most part, of course, there are scammers and folks like that, but But those aren't the people that are building this stuff. Those aren't the people who are making Ethereum a reality or creating the Avalanche blockchain ecosystem or Solana or whatever. The folks that are doing that are really interesting to us at Decential. And those are the people whose stories we want to tell. To begin with, like we had this feeling that this was like a moment in, say you were in San Francisco in 1969 and you might not have known what was going on, but you knew something was going on. And that's like the cultural feel that we have for crypto at this moment. And so we really wanted to approach it from a cultural lens and from a people lens. And by that, if I can tell you an awesome story about somebody who's a co-founder at a protocol and tell you about how they used to be on Wall Street or they used to drive a truck and then they got turned on to Bitcoin and now they've figured out that this peer-to-peer stuff could really apply to artists in the NFT space. If I can lure you in with that personal story, then I'm going to be able to tell you about NFTs and I'm going to be able to teach you about maybe what digital scarcity means. And so that was really the genesis of it all. We're not coming at it so much right now from a news perspective, and all this stuff is happening in the space, of course, and we can't ignore it. But what we wanted to do is we felt like there was a void in terms of a news organization that would tell these stories about the people and like educate you through really great characters. And so that's what Neil and I set out to do. And that's what we're trying to do through the editorial side on the website, through our podcasts, through our films. We want to make this a more human space because we felt like there was too much emphasis on the technology and that could scare people off. And a lot of mainstream news organizations, I think, to make it seem like this stuff is all really complicated and scary. And I don't think it is, to be honest. I think it's, if you're, I hate to say it, if you're a lazy kind of reporter and you don't want to learn about it, you might just say, yeah, it's scary. I don't understand it. It's complicated. But really, it's not that complicated. And I think that does a great disservice as well to the amazing people who are making all of this stuff into a reality.
I totally agree as well. Matt, you mentioned Decential and some of the things you're working on. Like, where can people find, like you said, video content, podcasts, the written stuff? Of course, all the links, I'll have your links and Decential's links in the podcast and the show notes on the YouTube channel as well. But are there any other places people can follow you and watch and enjoy your content?
Yeah, of course. The website is decential.io. We are on Twitter at Decential Media. We are on YouTube, same thing, Decential Media. I've got a podcast. We've got a podcast called Lights Camera Crypto that is all about where entertainment and Web3 are intersecting. So it's by a guy named Stephen Ladden, who's here in LA, and he's interviewing people in Hollywood, both on the kind of studio side and the artist side, to talk about how NFTs and blockchain are changing. And we've got a great new podcast called The Carson Daly Show, with our host, Carson Daly. She's just a firecracker. She's amazing. She's really smart and irreverent and funny. She interviews people and just has a ton of comments on current topics like FTX and what's going on with the bankruptcies and all sorts of stuff right now. So those are all, you can find all of that stuff on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And so we've got more coming. And so the films are a little slower coming. I've learned this firsthand as a reporter and somebody used to a deadline at a news agency like Bloomberg. It's like you're on a deadline, you're like, got to get it done. It happens pretty quick. Filmmaking is a lot slower. It takes time, a lot of lawyers involved, a lot of other people involved, but we're working on that. And we are trying to be one of the first places to really bring blockchain and Web3 into a video format and into a filmmaking format. That's all available on the website.
Nice. Okay. Because, yeah, I mean, I've been focused on your book, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes as well, but I didn't even realize there was a podcast myself, which is nice. So I'm going to have to partake of that as well, because I've been looking for good crypto podcasts when I go for my bi-weekly bike ride. So that's going to be something for me.
Yeah, we got you covered.
Nice. All right, I mentioned the book. It has got the best title ever, Out of the Ether, and Ethereum, I guess, just lends that the name just comes from. That tells the story of the world's number 2 blockchain, of course, which is Ethereum. I mean, why did you decide to write this story? I started off in crypto as an Ethereum miner here in Taiwan, so I'm familiar with the story, but just give everybody a high-level overview of this book. And I'm enjoying it so far. I've already told Matt, I'm not quite finished yet. It's been a crazy week, but I'm hoping to finish it before Chinese New Year at this side of the world.
Yeah, thank you very much. The reason I decided to write the book was because I originally wrote a story for Bloomberg. Has a couple magazines. One of them is called Markets. And the editor of Markets came to me in 2016, and they always have a heist issue. So it's like a issue where every story is about some kind of heist in finance or in general, like a bank robbery, right? So he said to me, he knew that I had been covering crypto for a little bit, and he said, "Hey, do you have any heist stories?" And I'm like, "Oh, I got a good one," because I've been following the DAO hack of 2016 in Ethereum, but I didn't know much about Ethereum at that point, to be honest, and hadn't written much about it. It was early in kind of my coverage of the space. But in June of 2016, this thing called the DAO, which was basically just a way for the community to pool money and then vote on projects that it would fund, like a venture capital kind of system. So they were going to pool a bunch of ether, and if you came up with a proposal to the DAO community for a new application that would run on Ethereum, they would vote and say, yes, we like this. And then they would give you some of that money, right? So it was a way to fund all the startups that needed to create the applications that would make Ethereum like interesting and good to use. So I'll try to be real brief. They thought they might raise $10 to $15 million. They ended up raising $150 million in this DAO contract, which was a smart contract that just sat on the Ethereum blockchain. Because Ethereum is a cryptocurrency and it goes up and down in value, by the time it was hacked about a month later, the amount of money in the contract had risen to $250 million. So $250 million was just sitting there in this contract on Ethereum. There are a lot of security issues with it. Like, people had pointed to many different vulnerabilities, but nobody wanted to put the brakes on and say stop. Then it got hacked, and $55 million was stolen in about a little more than a day. The crazy thing about blockchain and a smart contract is once there's a vulnerability and it's exploited, you can't do anything about it. You just have to watch. Like, you can't change a smart contract. There's no switch to flip. It takes weeks. It takes like consensus votes and all sorts of other kind of boring things. There's nothing anyone could do. And I watched this happen. I remember I write about it in the book, where I was like sick at home and it was happening on this Friday in June of 2016. And I'm like, oh my God, this is crazy. At that time at Bloomberg, Ethereum wasn't even really a thing. There was really nothing to like point to or to write about in terms of a Bloomberg audience, because my editors would say, okay, what's the implication here for Wall Street? Or why does this matter to our audience? And at that point, I really couldn't have pointed to anything. So I didn't write about it at the time, but I just found it fascinating and watched what happened over the next coming months. Then later that year, the editor came back and said, hey, do you know any heist stories? So I said, heck yeah. And so I wrote that story for the magazine about the DAO hack, and it was the most fun I'd ever had in my career. Got to interview all these really amazing Ethereum developers and the folks that were around in the space, and people who helped mitigate the hack and the way that they all went about reversing like what happened. And it gets really weird, where they were able to change the history of the blockchain, which is not supposed to happen because blockchains are supposed to be immutable, but they didn't care. And it was very contentious, and it was just like a really amazing, fun reporting exercise and writing exercise. And so things, no joke, like the bug in the Ethereum or in the smart contract of the DAO was on line 666, like things like that, where you just can't make it up. And that was just one example about all the really great details that I uncovered. So then I used that story of the magazine story. I'm like, oh my God, I want to write a book about Ethereum. And I think this is a great way to, I can string the DAO attack throughout the whole book as a kind of narrative tension device. And then in other chapters, I'll write about Vitalik Buterin and where did he come from, and the Ethereum Foundation, and how everything came to be, and string the DAO hack throughout the book. And another thing I wanted to do was try to find the DAO attacker, because nobody had ever really made an effort to find out who actually did it. And I found that kind of weird. So that was another kind of thing in the book that I did my best to try to uncover who the hacker was. And I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, it was great. The magazine article I said was the most fun in my career. And then I was surpassed by the book, because I got to interview and know so many people that were just so fascinating and just great characters in their own right. And I knew from the magazine story that all I had to do was get these people to talk to me and the book would just write itself. And that's what happened. I spent maybe 9 months reporting the book and I wrote it in about 2.5 months. So it just flowed out. It was amazing. It was really fun.
That's impressive. 2.5 months to put that out is something else. Matt, like, I love the style of the book, and I'm wondering, like, this was of course was like a once in a lifetime story. Hopefully, that something like this doesn't happen again. But do you see yourself writing another style of this book, like maybe about FTX or something else? Is there another book that you want to do about crypto in a similar
There,
style?
oh, yes, there could have been 10 other books like this in crypto just in the last 2 years, probably. That's the craziness, right? I definitely do want to write another book, but at the moment I am so consumed with Decential and being the editor in chief there and getting the startup off the ground that right now I don't have the capacity for it. But I do my first love is writing. That's why I'm in this job in the first place. And that's why I became a reporter, because I love to write. So I definitely want to get back to that. But at the moment, I don't have the bandwidth. The great thing about crypto is that there are just story after story. I think you could tell a thriller, like you mentioned, Terra Luna going down and then bringing 3 Hours Capital down, and then that leading to Celsius and Voyager and all these dominoes. You could probably tell a great thriller right there. But unfortunately, at this point anyway, I'm not going to be able to do that. But I'm sure in the near future, hopefully if Decential we get our feet under us and we just get stable, and I could maybe develop or devote my time a little more to something like that.
Okay, no problem. A quick question for those of people like myself is, for the book right out of the ether, is there an audiobook version available for people who like to sleep and listen to books or ride a bike and listen to books?
Yeah. Yes, there is. There's an audio version, there's a Kindle version, there's the hardback, the real book. There is a special edition that I had printed that only 1,000 were made that you can actually mint as an NFT. That one's at outoftheether.net if you're into that.
Oh, yes. I did not know.
So yeah, I like to play with the format. If I'm going to write about this stuff, I want to also be using it as a way to the cool thing is that you get an actual one of 1,000 copies of the book, and then you can mint an NFT for it. And so, yeah, that's something that I love about this space, is that it's something that you can interact with. And if you're going to be writing about it or in the space, you should be, I think, playing around with all the different new options that it gives you.
I know, I totally agree. Matt, maybe one of the final questions for today is, I think you are in the perfect place to talk about this year in blockchain and crypto, and especially you've been through a crypto winter before. Again, you can't tell the future, I can't tell the future, you're not giving financial advice. Like, what do you see happening in blockchain and crypto in 2023? Do you see the public's confidence being restored? What's your take on that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see the public's confidence being restored in anytime soon. I think crypto has become a punchline, which I hate. I think FTX really drove that home, where they were supposed to be responsible and a paragon in this space, and then they turn out to be frauds and stealing customer money. It's something, if you've followed traditional finance, happen, and it's going to happen in crypto, but it's really unsettling, in my opinion, to have to go through this again with more fraud. I think what's going to happen now is regulators are definitely going to come in and they're going to impose new regulations and new laws. I would really like in the United States to see Congress get involved. I think that new laws need to be written. I don't think that the existing structure of the Security Exchange Act or the Commodity Exchange Act, I don't think they really capture what we're talking about today, because in a lot of cases, you might be interacting with a counterparty that is a smart contract. That's a piece of code. And that's not something that our current laws understand or envision. You've got other instances like Treasury's OFAC department saying that Tornado Cash code is sanctioned and is something that's illegal to interact with, even though it's just a piece of code. And you can be using that code at Tornado Cash for a good purpose or a bad purpose, but they've made a blanket assessment that it's something that's on the sanctions list. So that's not the right approach, in my opinion. You can use a car to drive to the grocery store, or you can use a car to kill somebody. That doesn't mean we should make cars illegal. So I'm I'm wary of that. I don't think that the politicians in any country right now are sufficiently educated enough on this space to make good decisions. So that makes me a little apprehensive. And I'm hoping that it's a sort of a more general or gentle approach to start with, and not something that's overreaching. And something like Elizabeth Warren wants to do in the United States is, let's outlaw it all. No, this isn't going away. You can't put the genie back in the bottle here. Bitcoin is not going away. The peer-to-peer decentralized structure that people have created is not going away. So people in governments need to understand that. And so that's my, I don't see a new dawn yet right now. I think there's still some shakeout to come. And I think that, but for your listeners, nothing about my initial opinion about what this technology provides and the potential that it creates has changed. I think it's just we're going through another cycle here. And I'll be fascinated to see what comes out of this downturn, because like we were talking about earlier, the bear market after 2017, like when we came out of that, we had a lot of these DeFi applications, and the NFT market like came out of it. And that was something that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, but it was amazing. And so I expect that to happen again. I don't know where that's going to happen. I think that there is a lot of really interesting stuff going on in the arts, in music and in digital art. And I think it's more and more industries are learning that, oh my gosh, this new peer-to-peer system, this decentralized way of organizing can really change the way my industry works, whether it's, I don't know what it is, but real estate or take other things. And that's what's fascinating, is that is spreading around, and people are figuring out that some of the problems that they've had in their industries for decades might be solved through this new kind of infrastructure. So I'm confident about that. I'm optimistic about that, but I don't see, to be honest with you, right now in January of 2023, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel right now. But that doesn't mean that it's not coming, in my opinion.
And I totally agree with that. Matt, I don't take too much of your time. I want you to have an enjoyable rest of the evening. Talked about a lot. We've talked about the awesome book that I hope people will check out at some point. Is there anything else you want to mention or plug today before we end up today's show?
Just again, check out the website, Decential.io. We've got a bunch of great podcasts out there, which you can find on the site or on Apple or Spotify. We've got more podcasts coming, and we're on YouTube, and we're just trying to be an independent third party purveyor of the culture in this movement. And we think that's really an important piece of it. And we're working on getting more news into the mix. And we're just hoping that to be a trusted source for people to learn about crypto, or if you already know about crypto, to maybe learn about some of your colleagues and their past stories and their life that you might not know about from other coverage that you've seen of them. So that's the sweet spot we're trying to hit.
And that is a spot that really is needed, because it's like just the story in this book itself was like, it took me a while when I first got into Ethereum to piece it all together from many disparate sources. And it's all here in this book. And I think we need more stories like this. So I'm looking forward to what else is going to come out from Decential. And Matt, thank you again. And hopefully we can get you on maybe towards the end of the year. You can recap how everything's going on at Decential. And I'm going to keep my fingers crossed for another book in the future that everything's worked out. And hopefully we can catch up soon.
I would love that. Yeah. And thank you so much. And you're welcome for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you.